His fingers actually reached for my hair before I could step back. In a boardroom full of white collars and white faces, I became nothing but a curiosity, an exhibit they could touch. Hi, I'm Vanessa Mitchell. I'm 32, have a master's in finance, and somehow ended up as the only Black financial analyst at Westridge Capital Partners. Let me tell you how that boardroom moment changed everything. Your dreads are wild. Can I touch them? Richard Parker said it loud enough that his voice bounced off the polished mahogany table. 12 pairs of eyes swiveled toward me like synchronized swimmers. I froze mid-presentation. My PowerPoint slide showing third-quarter projections that had taken me 3 sleepless nights to perfect. Excuse me? My voice came out higher than intended. Richard, the COO and nephew of the founder, leaned back in his ergonomic chair, that smile spreading across his face. The smile that said he knew exactly what he was doing. Come on, Vanessa. I've always wondered what they feel like. They're so exotic. A ripple of awkward laughter circled the table. I glanced at my direct supervisor, Martin, who suddenly found his notebook fascinating. The company's first Black financial analyst was being turned into a petting zoo attraction, and no one was going to stop it. I'd prefer to continue with the presentation, if that's all right. I gripped my laser pointer so tightly my knuckles ached. Just having a little fun, Richard said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. Lighten up. That night, I sat in my apartment, a glass of Cabernet in hand, staring at the skyline. 3 years of fighting for respect at Westridge, of double-checking every calculation, of arriving first and leaving last, of ignoring the microaggressions that peppered my days like static electricity. And for what? To be reduced to my hair in front of the entire executive team? My mother had warned me. After graduating top of my class at Howard and completing my master's at Columbia, she'd said, "The higher you climb, the more they'll try to remind you of your place." I'd rolled my eyes then. I was naive enough to believe excellence would shield me. The following week, I discovered my meticulously researched investment strategy for a major client had been reassigned to Kevin, Richard's golf buddy with half my qualifications and twice my confidence. When I confronted Martin about it, he sighed like I was a child throwing a tantrum. Richard thought Kevin might have better rapport with the client. It's not personal, Vanessa, but it was personal. It had been personal since the day I walked through Westridge's glass doors with my freshly done locks and Ivy League credentials. I started documenting everything. Every passed-over promotion, every stolen idea, every joke that wasn't funny. I created a spreadsheet because that's what financial analysts do. We track patterns. And the pattern at Westridge was clear as quarterly reports. 6 months after the boardroom incident, I met Eliza Chen at a Women in Finance networking event. She was brilliant, sharp-tongued, and the founder of a small but growing investment firm that specialized in undervalued assets. "You look like someone who's planning an escape," she said, sidling up to me at the bar. I laughed, surprised by her directness. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to another woman who's been there." She handed me her card. "When you're ready to be valued for your brain instead of being treated like a curiosity, call me." I kept Eliza's card but didn't call. Not yet. There was something I needed to understand first. The structural weakness in Westridge's business model. As an analyst who'd been sidelined but not fired, I had access to data without being closely watched. People tend to underestimate those they've dismissed. Westridge had a problem they weren't addressing. Their client portfolio was top-heavy, too dependent on a handful of major accounts. One of those accounts belonged to Horizon Technologies, a company I'd been tracking for months. Their financial indicators were flashing warning signs that Westridge was ignoring, perhaps because Richard and the CEO played poker together. I worked late one evening, cross-referencing publicly available data with our internal projections. The discrepancy was startling. Westridge was betting big on Horizon's continued growth, but the fundamentals told a different story. Their new product line was failing, and they were burning through cash reserves at an alarming rate. When I tried to raise the alarm in our team meeting, Richard cut me off. "We've got this covered. Vanessa, why don't you focus on the Smallwood account? That seems more your level." The Smallwood account, a tiny nonprofit with barely 6 figures to invest. The professional equivalent of being asked to sit at the kids' table. That night, I finally called Eliza. "I've been wondering when I'd hear from you," she said, her voice warm despite the late hour. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that I'm ready to walk away," I replied. "But there's something else. Something bigger." We met for coffee the next morning. I brought data, not complaints. Eliza listened, asked sharp questions, and finally leaned back with a gleam in her eye. You've identified a major market inefficiency. Westridge is overvaluing Horizon, and when that bubble bursts, it'll take Westridge's reputation with it, I finished, unless someone were positioned to step in, to offer stability to those clients when they're suddenly looking for new management. Eliza tapped her fingernails against her cup. Someone with insider knowledge of those client relationships. That would be unethical. I stirred my coffee slowly. What's unethical is treating a Harvard-educated financial analyst like a sideshow because of her hair, Eliza countered. I'm not suggesting industrial espionage. I'm suggesting you know your worth and use your expertise where it will be appreciated. I gave notice the following week. Richard didn't even try to hide his relief. Some company cultures just aren't a good fit for everyone, he said, not meeting my eyes as he signed my exit paperwork. Martin was more direct. You're making a mistake. Eliza Chen's firm is small potatoes. You're burning a bridge with the biggest investment firm in the region. I smiled and thanked him for his concern. My last day, I cleaned out my desk while the office buzzed with news of the Horizon Technologies account. They'd just committed to doubling their investment with Westridge. Richard was taking the executive team out for champagne to celebrate. As I walked out carrying my small box of personal items, I could hear the popping of corks from the conference room. I checked my phone. Eliza had texted, "Ready when you are." I was more than ready. What Richard and Westridge didn't understand was that sometimes the person you mock today becomes the person who decides your fate tomorrow. And I'd been taking notes, detailed, analyst-quality notes, for 3 long years. At Eliza Chen Partners, I wouldn't just be respected. I'd be essential. And with my intimate knowledge of Westridge's client portfolio and their dangerous dependency on Horizon Technologies, I had something even more valuable than respect. I had leverage, and I knew exactly how to use it. 6 months into my new role at Eliza Chen Partners, the news broke. Horizon Technologies announced a massive product recall, followed by the resignation of their CFO. Their stock plummeted 43% in a single day. I watched the financial news from our modest but modern office, a cold sense of satisfaction settling in my chest as analysts scrambled to explain what I had seen coming months ago. Eliza stood beside me, arms crossed. "You called it," she said simply. "To the letter." The recall was just the beginning. Within weeks, investigative journalists uncovered accounting irregularities at Horizon. The SEC launched an investigation, and Westridge Capital Partners, with their heavily leveraged position in Horizon, began to bleed. I didn't celebrate outwardly. That wasn't my style. But I did treat myself to a new pair of earrings, small golden scales of justice that dangled whenever I moved my head. My grandmother would have appreciated the symbolism. "We need to move quickly," Eliza said during our strategy meeting. "Westridge clients will be looking for lifeboats. We need to position ourselves as the stable, trustworthy alternative." "I've already drafted targeted proposals for their top 7 clients," I replied, sliding a folder across the table. "Customized based on their investment histories and risk profiles." Eliza flipped through the documents, her eyebrows rising. "This is extremely thorough." "I had 3 years to study their preferences while being ignored in meetings," I said with a shrug. "Turns out, being invisible has its advantages." Our first acquisition was the Martinson Foundation, a charitable trust with a $50 million portfolio. They'd been with Westridge for 15 years, but one lunch with their board was all it took. My detailed understanding of their philanthropic priorities and conservative investment approach sealed the deal. 3 more clients followed in quick succession. With each new account, our firm grew, and my equity stake, part of my original agreement with Eliza, became increasingly valuable. We hired 2 more analysts, then a dedicated client relations manager. We moved to a larger office with a view of the river. Meanwhile, Westridge was floundering. The Horizon disaster had exposed weaknesses in their risk assessment protocols, weaknesses I had flagged and they had ignored. Their stock dropped, and rumors of layoffs swirled. I didn't reach out to my former colleagues. I didn't need to. They reached out to me. First came Diane from accounting, then Marcus from client relations. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Awkward acknowledgement of how I'd been treated, followed by thinly veiled inquiries about openings at Eliza Chen Partners. "You know, I always thought you got a raw deal," Marcus said over coffee, his eyes not quite meeting mine. That day in the boardroom with Richard, I should have said something. "Yes," I agreed mildly. You should have. I didn't hire him. I didn't hire any of them. Not out of spite, but because Eliza and I were building something different. A firm where excellence mattered more than connections, where diversity of thought was an asset, not a curiosity. 18 months after leaving Westridge, I received a text from an unknown number. Can we meet? It's important. It was signed simply, M. Martin, my former supervisor, the man who had watched silently as Richard turned me into a punchline. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our offices. Martin had aged years in months, the skin under his eyes sagging, his expensive suit looking somehow deflated. Westridge is in trouble, he said without preamble. Real trouble. I'm aware, I replied, stirring my latte. The business pages had been chronicling Westridge's decline for months. Their desperate attempt to merge with a rival firm had fallen through just last week. Richard is looking for someone to blame, Martin continued. He's been going through old records, old recommendations. He found your reports about Horizon. I kept my expression neutral, though a flicker of satisfaction warmed my chest. My reports warning that Horizon was overvalued and overextended. The ones he dismissed? Martin nodded miserably. He's trying to claim you didn't emphasize the risks enough. That you were negligent. I laughed then. A genuine laugh that turned heads at nearby tables. I have copies of every report, every email, every meeting minute where I raised concerns. Time-stamped, backed up, and shared with my attorney the day after I left. Martin paled. You knew this would happen. I knew Richard would never accept responsibility for his own failures, I corrected him. Just like he never acknowledged his behavior toward me. What do you want? Martin asked quietly. It was the first time anyone from Westridge had ever asked me that question. What did I want? Not revenge, exactly. Justice, perhaps. Recognition. But most of all, I wanted change. I want a seat on the board, I said. Martin blinked rapidly. What? Westridge needs a capital infusion to survive. Eliza Chen Partners has capital. We also have a growing reputation for ethical investment practices and risk management. Exactly what Westridge needs right now. In exchange for our investment, I want a board seat. Richard would never agree. Richard isn't in a position to disagree. I cut in. Not if he wants to keep his corner office. Not if he wants to avoid SEC scrutiny over ignoring clear warning signs about Horizon. Martin stared at me for a long moment. You planned this? All of it. I thought about denying it. But what was the point? I recognized an opportunity, I said instead. The same opportunity Richard ignored when he was too busy making jokes about my hair to listen to my financial analysis. 2 weeks later, Eliza and I sat across from Westridge's board of directors, minus Richard, who was conspicuously absent. The terms were straightforward. A significant investment from our firm in exchange for 2 board seats and a restructuring of senior management. This is highly unusual, complained one elderly board member whose name I'd never bothered to learn. We hardly know your firm. On the contrary, I replied smoothly. I worked here for 3 years. I know Westridge intimately, its strengths and its weaknesses, and Ms. Chen's reputation in the industry speaks for itself. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. Desperation has a way of clarifying priorities. As we left the building, Eliza squeezed my arm. Phase 1 complete, she said with a slight smile. You realize what this means, right? I nodded, looking up at the gleaming glass tower that had once represented everything I thought I wanted. It means we're just getting started. That night, I called my mother. She'd been skeptical when I'd left Westridge, worried about the security I was giving up. But she'd supported me anyway, just as she had when I decided to get locks in my final year at Columbia, despite warnings that they might not be professional enough for the finance world. We did it, Mom, I said when she picked up. We got the deal. We? She asked, and I could hear her smile. Or you? Both, I replied. But I couldn't have done it without Eliza. And she couldn't have done it without you, my mother pointed out. Remember that, Vanessa. Your value isn't determined by people like Richard Parker. Never was. After we hung up, I stood on my apartment balcony, looking at the city lights. In just under 2 years, I'd gone from being the black woman with the wild dreads that everyone felt entitled to comment on, to a significant shareholder in one of the region's largest investment firms. But this wasn't the end of my story. For years, I'd tried to make myself smaller, less noticeable. I'd straightened my hair through college and my early career, endured the painful headaches from tight ponytails, all to avoid becoming a topic of conversation. Getting locks had been my first act of professional defiance, a declaration that I would no longer contort myself to fit into spaces that weren't designed for me. Richard's mockery in that boardroom had been painful, yes, but it had also been clarifying. It showed me exactly who valued my mind and who saw only my appearance. It showed me which battles were worth fighting and which institutions were worth saving. The Westridge board meeting was scheduled for the following month, my first as a member. I'd already prepared a comprehensive presentation on diversifying their leadership and investment strategies. And I'd bought a new outfit for the occasion, a tailored suit in a rich blue that complemented my skin tone perfectly, and those gold scales of justice earrings. I would walk into that boardroom not as someone seeking approval, but as someone with the power to approve, and my dreads would be as wild and beautiful as ever. The weekend before the board meeting, I received another text from Martin. Richard knows about the meeting. He's not happy. I smiled to myself as I typed my response. His feelings are not my concern. What Richard failed to understand, what Westridge as an institution had failed to understand, was that diversity wasn't a box to check or a quota to fill. It was a strategic advantage. My perspective as a Black woman in finance had allowed me to see risks and opportunities that they had missed, precisely because I didn't share their blind spots. Now I had the platform to prove it, and a growing stake in the company's future. Phase 2 was about to begin. The morning of my first Westridge board meeting, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, carefully twisting a few locks that had come loose. Each one represented years of growth, patience, and persistence made physical, just like my career. My phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. Ready for the coronation? Queen V? I smiled at her nickname for me. Over the past 2 years, our relationship had evolved from mentor-mentee to true partnership. Eliza had the connections and industry respect. I had the analytical mind and intimate knowledge of Westridge's weaknesses. Together, we'd transformed her boutique firm into a serious player. Born ready, I texted back. Meeting you in the lobby at 8:30. I arrived at the Westridge building 30 minutes early, wanting to absorb the moment. This gleaming tower had once been the site of my professional humiliation. Today, I'd walk in as a part owner. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Eliza pulled up in her Tesla, immaculate as always in a charcoal pantsuit. Nervous? She asked as we walked through the revolving doors. Focused, I corrected her. Our investment had saved Westridge from collapse, but money alone wouldn't fix the systemic problems that had led to their downfall. Today's presentation needed to be flawless. The executive floor was quieter than I remembered. The atmosphere subdued. The Horizon disaster had resulted in a 30% staff reduction. Those remaining walked with the cautious air of survivors, eyes darting, voices hushed. Martin met us at the elevator, his handshake a little too firm, his smile a little too bright. Vanessa, Eliza, good to see you both. Everyone's assembled in the main boardroom. I raised an eyebrow. Everyone. Martin's smile faltered. Well, almost everyone. Richard had a conflict, but he sends his regrets. Does he? I kept my tone neutral, though I suspected Richard's conflict was his refusal to sit at a table where I held power. That's unfortunate. I was looking forward to reconnecting. The boardroom fell silent as we entered. 12 faces turned toward us, the same number as that day 3 years ago, though some were new. The massive mahogany table gleamed under recessed lighting, water pitchers catching prisms of morning sun. I took my assigned seat, not at the periphery where I'd once stood giving presentations, but near the head of the table. The chair had a small placard. Vanessa Mitchell, board member, Chen Westridge Partnership. Martin cleared his throat. As you all know, we're here today to finalize the integration of Eliza Chen Partners with Westridge Capital. Ms. Mitchell and Ms. Chen have prepared a presentation on proposed structural changes. I opened my laptop, connecting it to the room's display system. My opening slide appeared on the wall. Strategic restructuring, building a more resilient Westridge. For the next 45 minutes, I laid out our vision. I was clinical, precise, backing every recommendation with data. The problems at Westridge weren't just about the Horizon investment. They were systemic, from risk assessment protocols to client relationship management to talent development. Our analysis shows that Westridge has consistently undervalued diverse perspectives in its decision-making processes, I explained, displaying a chart comparing performance metrics across different team compositions. Teams with greater diversity of background and thought showed 23% higher accuracy in risk assessment and 18% better client retention during market volatility. One board member, an older gentleman named Harrison who'd been with the company since its founding, shifted uncomfortably. While these numbers are interesting, Ms. Mitchell, Westridge has always prided itself on hiring the best talent, regardless of other factors. I met his gaze evenly. The data suggests otherwise, Mr. Harrison. When 92% of senior leadership shares identical educational and socioeconomic backgrounds, blind spots become inevitable. The Horizon disaster wasn't bad luck. It was the predictable outcome of homogeneous thinking. The room tensed. I was calling out not just their business practices, but their worldview. "What exactly are you proposing?" asked Lydia Winters, one of the few women on the original board. I advanced to my final slide. A complete restructuring of senior management, with a focus on cognitive diversity. New risk assessment protocols that require multiple independent analyses before major investments. A mentorship program that identifies and develops talent from underrepresented backgrounds. And leadership? Harrison pressed. Eliza and I will co-chair the transition committee, I replied. We'll work with HR to evaluate existing leadership and identify areas for improvement or replacement. Replacement? Martin's voice cracked slightly. You're talking about firing people? I'm talking about accountability, I corrected him. The same accountability that was missing when Westridge ignored clear warning signs about Horizon. The same accountability that was missing when senior leadership created a hostile work environment for certain employees. My eyes met his briefly. We both knew what I was referring to. Harrison's face had reddened. This sounds like a hostile takeover masked as corporate social responsibility. Eliza spoke for the first time, her voice calm and measured. This is a rescue operation, Mr. Harrison. Westridge's market value has declined 64% in 18 months. Without our investment, this company would likely be facing bankruptcy or a fire sale to competitors. We're offering a path forward that addresses the root causes of that decline. The debate continued for another hour, growing heated at times. But the numbers were on our side, as was the reality of Westridge's precarious position. By lunchtime, the board had voted to approve our restructuring plan, with only Harrison and one other member dissenting. As the meeting adjourned, Martin approached me. Richard's office, he said quietly. He wants to speak with you. I glanced at Eliza, who nodded slightly. I'll handle the next steps here, she said. Do what you need to do. Richard's corner office was exactly as I remembered it. Expansive windows, modernist furniture, ego-stroking awards lined up on floating shelves. He stood with his back to the door, gazing out at the city skyline, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand despite the early hour. A drinking before noon, Richard? I asked, closing the door behind me. That seems unwise. He turned slowly. He'd aged since I'd last seen him. New lines around his eyes, a slight paunch straining his bespoke shirt. But that smirk was unchanged, the one that had accompanied so many dismissive comments over the years. Vanessa Mitchell, he said, swirling his drink. You've been busy. Productive, I corrected. There's a difference. He gestured to a chair. I remained standing. So this is your revenge? He asked. Buy your way onto the board and purge everyone who ever slighted you. I almost laughed at his characterization. This isn't about revenge, Richard. It's about competence. Westridge nearly collapsed because you and your inner circle ignored clear warnings about Horizon Technologies. Warnings that I explicitly provided. Ancient history, he waved his hand dismissively. Market conditions changed. Market conditions always change. That's why diversity of perspective is so valuable. But you couldn't see past my hair to hear what I was actually saying. He had the decency to look momentarily uncomfortable. That was a joke. Office banter. If you were that sensitive. It wasn't sensitivity, Richard. It was clarity. That moment showed me exactly how you saw me. Not as a financial analyst with insights worth considering, but as a curiosity, a token. Something wild to be touched and commented on. I moved closer, my voice level. You know what's truly ironic? If you'd listened to me about Horizon, your position here would be secure. Westridge would be thriving. Instead, you're drinking whiskey at 11 a.m., watching your legacy crumble. He set down his glass with a sharp click. My uncle founded this company. My family name is on the building. You think you can just walk in here with your diversity charts and your grudges and take over? Your uncle built something impressive, I acknowledged. But you were entrusted with maintaining it, and you failed. Not because I sabotaged you, but because you sabotaged yourself with your own arrogance and blind spots. His jaw tightened. What do you want from me, Vanessa? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry if I offended you. There. Can we move on now? The insincerity in his voice was almost comical. 3 years ago, I might have accepted such a hollow apology, grateful for any acknowledgement, but I wasn't that person anymore. What I want is irrelevant, I told him. The board has approved our restructuring plan. Your position as COO will be evaluated along with all senior leadership. His face darkened. You can't fire me. Your contract includes performance clauses. I cut in. Clauses that were triggered when Westridge lost 64% of its value under your leadership. But termination isn't my first choice, Richard. No? His expression was guarded. No. I believe in second chances. In growth. In people facing consequences and learning from them. I reached into my bag and removed a folder. This is a new position we're creating. Director of Client Development for our Midwest region. The compensation is 40% less than your current package, but it's a chance to rebuild your reputation. He stared at the folder like it might bite him. And you're demoting me. I'm offering you the opportunity you never gave me. The chance to prove your worth based on your actual abilities rather than your connections. I placed the folder on his desk. You have until noon to decide. His laugh was bitter. Or what? I clean out my desk. Precisely. I turned to leave, but paused at the door. One more thing, Richard. If you accept this position, you'll be reporting to Diane Washington. I believe you remember her. She used to work in accounting here before joining our firm. She wears her hair in locks too. Beautiful ones. And if I ever hear that you've commented on them or tried to touch them, your second chance will be your last. I left him standing there, the folder untouched on his desk. In the hallway, I exhaled slowly, releasing tension I hadn't realized I was holding. This confrontation had been building for years, a scene I'd rehearsed countless times in my mind. But the reality felt different. Less triumphant than I'd imagined. More melancholy. Richard's casual cruelty had altered the trajectory of my career, yet facing him now, I felt nothing but a cool detachment. Eliza was waiting for me by the elevators, eyebrows raised in question. It's done, I said simply. Did he grovel? Please tell me he groveled. I smiled slightly. Richard Parker doesn't grovel, but he has a decision to make. We spent the rest of the day in meetings, HR, financial teams, key client representatives. By evening, the first phase of our transition plan was in motion. I'd be splitting my time between our original office and Westridge for the foreseeable future, overseeing the integration of our firms and the implementation of new protocols. At 4:55 p.m., Martin knocked on the temporary office I'd been assigned. Richard's gone, he said without preamble. Cleared out his desk and left. No word on whether he's accepting the new position. I nodded, unsurprised. Thank you for letting me know. Martin lingered in the doorway. His expression conflicted. Was all of this really necessary, Vanessa? The board takeover, the restructuring. Couldn't you have just moved on? I considered his question carefully. This wasn't about the past, Martin. It was about the future. Westridge was failing because its leadership couldn't recognize the value of different perspectives. My experience here wasn't unique. It was symptomatic. And now you're in charge, he said, a hint of bitterness in his tone. Now the most qualified people will be in charge, I corrected him, regardless of who they know or what they look like. Isn't that how it should have been all along? He had no answer for that. Later that night, as Eliza and I celebrated over dinner, my phone buzzed with an email notification from Richard Parker. Are you going to read it? Eliza asked, noticing my hesitation. I set my phone aside. Tomorrow. Tonight is about celebrating how far we've come. She raised her glass. To Queen V, who turned humiliation into empire. I clinked my glass against hers. To partnerships that value what others dismiss. The email could wait. Whatever Richard had decided, acceptance, resignation, or threats, it wouldn't change the trajectory we'd set in motion. Westridge would transform, with or without him. The firm that had once seen me as nothing but my hair would now be led by the brain beneath it. The next morning, I finally read Richard's email. It was brief, just 3 sentences. Position accepted. Reporting Monday to Midwest office. Don't make me regret this. I forwarded it to Diane with a note. Your new direct report. History of inappropriate comments about Black women's hair. Perfect opportunity to demonstrate our new management approach. Diane's response came minutes later. Challenge accepted. Trust me, by the time I'm done with him, he'll be leading diversity seminars. I laughed out loud, drawing curious glances from other morning commuters on the train. 3 years ago, I'd stood in a boardroom, humiliated as a man reached for my hair like I was an exhibit in a petting zoo. Now, I was restructuring that company in my own image, with a team of brilliant minds that Westridge had overlooked or undervalued. The train pulled into my stop, and I joined the flow of suits and briefcases heading toward the financial district. My phone buzzed again, a text from my mother. Saw the announcement in the business journal. So proud of you, baby. Your grandfather would have loved to see this day. My grandfather, who'd worked as a janitor in a bank for 40 years, never allowed to rise despite his sharp mind for numbers, who'd taught me multiplication using the coins from his tip jar, who'd told me, they might not let you in the front door, Nessa, but once you find a window, climb through it and unlock the door for others. I looked up at the Westridge building as I approached, sunlight glinting off its glass facade. I wasn't just climbing through a window anymore. I was redesigning the entire house. 5 years to the day after Richard Parker had mocked my dreads in that boardroom, I stood in the elevator of what was now called Chen Westridge Partners, straightening the lapel of my tailored suit. The building was the same, but almost everything else had changed, including me. My phone buzzed with a message from Eliza. Board meeting in 20. Big news to share first. I smiled, knowing exactly what big news she was referring to. After 5 years of strategic acquisitions and restructuring, our firm was about to announce its largest move yet, the purchase of Atlantic Capital, a rival firm 3 times our original size. The deal would make Chen Westridge one of the top 10 investment management companies in the country. And I was about to be named CEO. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor, where Diane Washington waited, tablet in hand. She'd been one of my first hires after the takeover, promoted from accounting to head of client relations and eventually to COO. Her locks were now streaked with elegant silver strands, coiled in an intricate updo. "Good morning, boss," she greeted me, falling into step beside me. "Ready for your coronation?" I laughed. "Let's wait until the vote is official before we start with the royal titles." "Please. That vote is a formality, and you know it. The numbers from Q3 alone would secure your position, not to mention the Atlantic acquisition." She handed me the tablet. "Here's the final agenda and the latest projections. Oh, and Richard's quarterly report." I scrolled to the relevant section. Richard Parker had indeed accepted the Midwest regional position 5 years ago, swallowing his pride in exchange for keeping his place at the company. To everyone's surprise, including mine, he'd actually thrived in the role, once removed from the echo chamber of the executive floor. His client retention numbers were consistently strong, though his new business acquisition metrics remained middle of the pack. "He's requested a transfer back to headquarters," Diane added, watching me review his report. "Says 5 years in Chicago is enough penance." I looked up. Penance? Is that the word he used? His exact phrasing was, "I've proven myself in a secondary market and believe my skills would be better utilized at the center of operations," Diane recited. "But we both know what he means." I considered this as we walked through the open office space. Around us, analysts and account managers worked at modern workstations, a diverse group that reflected our deliberate recruiting efforts over the past 5 years. The old Westridge had been overwhelmingly white and male, with diversity concentrated in lower-level positions. Our transformed firm now boasted one of the most diverse executive teams in the industry, with the performance metrics to prove its value. "What do you think?" I asked Diane. "About Richard's request?" She gave me a measured look. "Professionally, his numbers justify consideration for a larger role. Personally, I've supervised him for 5 years, and while he's learned to keep his comments to himself, I'm not convinced the man has actually changed his thinking." I nodded, unsurprised. "Set up a one-on-one with him next time he's in town. I want to evaluate for myself." The boardroom was already filling when we arrived. So much had changed since that fateful meeting 5 years ago, but the massive mahogany table remained, a reminder of where we'd started. I'd considered replacing it during the office renovation, but decided against it. Some continuity was valuable, even if only as a measuring stick for progress. Eliza caught my eye from across the room and made her way over, elegant as always in a cream-colored pantsuit. At 53, she'd recently started talking about stepping back from day-to-day operations, focusing more on strategy and mentorship. The Atlantic acquisition and my promotion to CEO were part of that transition plan. There she is, Eliza said warmly, squeezing my arm. The architect of our little empire. Our empire, I corrected her. I wouldn't be here without you taking a chance on me. And I wouldn't have this company without your analysis of Westridge's vulnerabilities, she countered. A fair trade, I'd say. The meeting was called to order, and for the next hour, we moved through quarterly reports, strategic initiatives, and the final details of the Atlantic Capital acquisition. The mood was positive, buoyed by strong performance across all divisions. Even old Harrison, who'd fought our takeover 5 years ago but ultimately remained on the board, seemed grudgingly impressed by the numbers. Finally, we reached the agenda item simply labeled Leadership Transition. Eliza stood to address the room. As you all know, I've been planning to transition from my role as CEO for some time now. With the Atlantic acquisition finalized, the timing is perfect for new leadership to guide us through this next phase of growth. She turned to me, her expression warm. I can think of no one better qualified than Vanessa Mitchell, whose vision and analytical brilliance have been instrumental in transforming Chen Westridge into the industry leader it is today. The vote was, as Diane had predicted, largely a formality, unanimous support, even from Harrison. 5 years of consistently outperforming the market had a way of silencing critics. As the meeting concluded, board members came to offer congratulations. Harrison approached last, his handshake firmer than necessary. Remarkable turnaround, he acknowledged, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. When you and Mrs. Chen first presented your restructuring plan, I had my doubts. I remember, I replied evenly. Yes, well, he cleared his throat. The numbers speak for themselves, though I still maintain that some of the cultural changes may have been excessive. By cultural changes, I knew he meant our diversity initiatives, the unconscious bias training, the restructured bonus system that rewarded collaborative success over individual performance, the very changes that had transformed Westridge from a failing old boys and club into a dynamic, resilient firm. The numbers do indeed speak for themselves, Mr. Harrison, I agreed. Our return on equity has increased 38% since implementation of those cultural changes. Our talent retention has improved by 42%. If that's excessive, I'm curious what you'd consider appropriate. He had no ready response for that. With a stiff nod, he moved on, leaving me with Eliza. Some minds never quite make the journey, she murmured, watching him go. But enough do, I replied. That's what matters. After the meeting, my assistant informed me that all senior staff had been asked to gather in the main conference room at 3 p.m. for a special announcement. The official communication about my appointment would go out company-wide tomorrow, but today was for the leadership team, the people who would be working most closely with me in my new role. I spent the intervening hours in back-to-back meetings, reviewing plans for integrating Atlantic's operations and personnel. By the time 3 p.m. arrived, I was running slightly late, hurrying down the hallway toward the conference room. I paused at the door, hearing the buzz of conversation inside. Taking a breath, I straightened my posture and entered. The room fell silent immediately. Around 40 people were gathered. Department heads, senior analysts, regional directors who happened to be in town. Among them, standing near the back wall, was Richard Parker. He must have flown in specifically for this announcement, though his quarterly review meeting wasn't scheduled until next week. Our eyes met briefly across the room. 5 years had changed him too. His hair had thinned considerably, and he'd gained weight despite expensive tailoring designed to conceal it. But that expression, that mix of calculation and contained hostility, was instantly recognizable. Eliza stepped forward. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I've asked you here because Chen Westridge is entering a new era, and I wanted you to be the first to hear about the leadership team that will guide us through it. She went on to announce my appointment as CEO, effective immediately, followed by Diane's promotion to President and COO. Several other key appointments rounded out the new executive structure, a team reflecting the diverse talent pool we'd cultivated over the past 5 years. Applause filled the room, and I stepped up to say a few words. As I looked out at the gathered faces, some I'd hired, some who'd been at Westridge before my time, all now part of what we'd built, I felt a moment of genuine pride. When I joined the original Westridge Capital as a financial analyst 8 years ago, I began, I couldn't have imagined standing here today. Not because I doubted my abilities, but because I saw so few paths forward for someone who looked like me in an industry that often values conformity over insight. I paused, my eyes briefly meeting Richard's again. The transformation of this company hasn't always been comfortable. Change rarely is. But by expanding our perspective, by recognizing that excellence comes in many forms, we've built something extraordinary. The Atlantic acquisition isn't just about market share, it's validation of our approach. Proof that diversity of thought isn't just a moral imperative, it's a competitive advantage. As the formal announcement concluded and people began to mingle, Richard made his way toward me. I had expected this confrontation eventually, though not necessarily today. "Congratulations, Vanessa," he said, his voice carefully modulated.
"Quite an achievement." "Thank you, Richard," I replied, equally measured. "I understand you're interested in returning to headquarters." His eyebrows rose slightly, perhaps surprised I was already aware of his request. "Yes. I've spent 5 years proving myself in Chicago. My numbers speak for themselves."
"They do," I acknowledged. "Your client retention is excellent. So you'll approve the transfer." His confidence was premature, but so typically Richard. "I'll consider it," I replied. "Though I'm curious, why now? What's changed after 5 years?" His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I've paid my dues, played by the new rules, attended every diversity seminar, mentored junior staff as assigned, kept my head down and my numbers up. I think I've demonstrated my value to this firm, regardless of our past interactions." There it was, the closest Richard Parker would ever come to acknowledging what had happened in that boardroom 5 years ago. No actual admission of wrongdoing, no genuine apology. Just a business calculation that his dues had been paid. Before I could respond, we were interrupted by my assistant, apologetically informing me that the CEO of Atlantic Capital was on the phone with urgent questions about tomorrow's announcement. "We'll continue this conversation next week during your scheduled review," I told Richard. In the meantime, I'd like you to prepare a detailed transition plan for the Midwest region, assuming your transfer request is approved. I'll need names of potential successors, client relationship status reports, everything." "Of course," he agreed readily, clearly interpreting my request as a positive sign. As I turned to leave, he added, "You know, I always recognized your analytical skills, Vanessa. Even back then, it was never personal." I paused, turning back to face him fully. The conference room had mostly emptied, leaving us in relative privacy. "It was always personal, Richard," I corrected him quietly. "When you commented on my hair, when you reached to touch it without permission, when you invited others to laugh at me rather than listen to me, that was deeply personal. The fact that you still don't understand that is exactly why your return to headquarters isn't a simple decision." His expression hardened. "I've proven my value for 5 years. Are you saying one comment from the past outweighs half a decade of performance? I'm saying that understanding why that one comment was problematic is as important as your performance metrics. Leadership at this level isn't just about numbers, it's about culture, about recognizing the impact of our words and actions on those around us." I glanced at my watch. "I really do need to take that call. We'll discuss this further next week." As I walked away, I could feel his eyes on my back. The Richard Parker of 5 years ago would have been seething with indignation, perhaps already planning some form of retaliation. I wondered how much this version had actually changed. The next week passed in a whirlwind of transition meetings, press interviews, and integration planning sessions with the Atlantic Capital team. The announcement of our acquisition made the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, with analysts praising the strategic fit between our firms. Our stock rose 12% on the news. By the time Richard's review meeting arrived, I'd had ample opportunity to consider his transfer request. I'd reviewed his complete performance history, spoken with Diane about her experiences supervising him, and even called several key clients in the Midwest region to gauge their relationships with him. He arrived at my office precisely on time, a thick folder tucked under his arm, the transition plan I'd requested. His demeanor was professional, controlled, no hint of the tension from our last interaction. "Richard," I greeted him, gesturing to the chairs arranged around a small conference table rather than having him sit across from my desk. A subtle but deliberate choice to set a more collaborative tone. "Vanessa," he replied, taking a seat and placing his folder on the table. Or should I say, Madam CEO, now. There was the faintest hint of something in his tone. Not quite mockery, but not quite respect either. I let it pass. I've reviewed your numbers from the Midwest region, I began. Particularly impressive given the economic headwinds in the manufacturing sector this past year, you've clearly built strong client relationships. He nodded, accepting the praise as his due. I've learned a lot about relationship management in the past 5 years. When you're not surrounded by a support team, you adapt. Indeed. I opened my own folder, containing my notes on his performance and transfer request. I'm particularly interested in your work with Blackwell Manufacturing. They were considering leaving us entirely after the merger, as I recall. They were, he confirmed. The CEO was traditional in his outlook, skeptical about our new direction. I had to convince him that our changes wouldn't affect his bottom line. I raised an eyebrow. Traditional in his outlook. That's a diplomatic phrasing. Richard shifted slightly in his chair. He had concerns about our diversity initiatives, worried we were prioritizing social agendas over financial performance. I showed him our results and explained how diverse teams actually improve analysis and risk management. He came around. I made a note. This was new information. Richard defending our approach rather than simply working around it. And you believe in that explanation? Or was it just what the client needed to hear? His eyes met mine directly. 5 years ago, I would have agreed with Blackwell. I thought all the diversity talk was just window dressing, political correctness, but the results speak for themselves. Our performance since the restructuring is undeniable. It wasn't a profound personal transformation, but it was honest. Richard was a numbers person, ultimately. Evidence could change his mind, even if his heart might lag behind. Let's talk about your transfer request, I said, moving to the central issue. Why headquarters specifically? The Northeast region has better performance metrics and an opening at the regional director level. Headquarters is where decisions are made, he replied immediately, where strategy is set. After 5 years in a regional role, I want to be part of that process again. Even though the culture here has changed dramatically from what you were used to, because it's changed, he countered. I want to be part of what's working, not stuck in a satellite office implementing decisions made by others. I studied him for a moment. There was ambition there, certainly. Richard had never lacked for that. But there seemed to be something else, too. A genuine curiosity about the transformation he'd observed from a distance. I have a different proposal, I said finally. One that would bring you back to headquarters, but in a role you might not have considered. His expression was guarded but interested. I'm listening. We're creating a new position, head of professional development and mentorship. The role would focus on identifying promising analysts and managers, particularly those from backgrounds underrepresented in finance, and guiding their career progression. Richard blinked, clearly taken aback. You want me to run diversity recruiting? Not recruiting, development, I corrected. Finding talent is only the first step. Nurturing it, challenging it, preparing it for leadership, that's where we sometimes fall short. Your experience on both sides of our transformation makes you uniquely qualified. You understand the old culture and have adapted to the new one. He leaned back, considering. It's not what I expected. The best opportunities rarely are. I closed my folder. Think about it. The position comes with a seat on the executive committee and compensation comparable to a regional directorship. But it's not for everyone. It requires genuine commitment to our vision, not just compliance with it. And if I decline, then we revisit your transfer request in 6 months, after you've trained your replacement in the Midwest. I could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes, weighing ambition against pride, immediate return versus long-term positioning. The Richard Parker who had mocked my hair 5 years ago would have rejected the offer outright, seeing it as beneath him. But this Richard had spent 5 years watching from the sidelines as our transformation yielded remarkable results. Can I have some time to consider it? He asked finally. Of course. I'll need your decision by Friday. As he gathered his materials to leave, he paused. Why offer me this role, Vanessa? After everything, you could have kept me in Chicago indefinitely, or found a reason to let me go altogether. It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself while formulating the proposal. Because talent is too valuable to waste, I replied honestly. Even talent that once failed to recognize the value in others. You've proven you can adapt, Richard. Now I'm offering you the chance to help others do the same. He nodded slowly. I'll have my answer by Friday. After he left, I remained at the conference table, reflecting on our conversation. 5 years ago, I'd walked out of Westridge carrying a box of personal items, my confidence shaken, but my resolve hardened. I couldn't have known then exactly how things would unfold. that Eliza would become my mentor and partner, that Horizon's collapse would create the opportunity to acquire Westridge, that I would eventually sit in the CEO's chair. But I had known with bone-deep certainty that Richard Parker's mockery in that boardroom wasn't just about me. It was symptomatic of a culture that devalued certain voices, certain perspectives, to its own detriment. And changing that culture would require more than my individual success. It would require systemic transformation. Friday morning, Richard's response arrived by email. After careful consideration, I accept the position of Head of Professional Development and Mentorship. While it represents a significant departure from my previous trajectory, I recognize its strategic importance to the firm's continued growth. I believe my experience on both sides of the Chen Westridge transformation provides valuable perspective. I am prepared to commit fully to the role's objectives. It was characteristically Richard, formal, focused on strategic positioning rather than personal growth. But the acceptance itself spoke volumes. 5 years ago, he couldn't see past my hair to recognize my analytical insights. Now, he was accepting a role dedicated to identifying and nurturing talent in all its forms. People could change, not overnight, not completely, and rarely for purely altruistic reasons. But they could change. I forwarded Richard's acceptance to Diane with a brief note. He said yes. Keep a close eye on him initially, but give him room to grow into the role. Her response came minutes later. Interesting choice, bold, but if anyone can turn Saul into Paul, it's you. I smiled at her biblical reference. The transformation wasn't quite that dramatic, but the principle applied. Sometimes, the most effective advocates for change are those who've experienced both sides. 3 months later, I stood at the podium in the main boardroom, the same room where Richard had once mocked my hair, where I had later presented our restructuring plan as a new board member, and where I had recently been named CEO. Today, it was filled with our entire headquarters staff, gathered for a special announcement. As you know, our acquisition of Atlantic Capital has positioned us as one of the top investment management firms in the country, I began. But size alone doesn't determine success in this industry. Culture does. Strategy does. Innovation does. I looked out at the assembled faces, a mosaic of backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives that hadn't existed at the original Westridge. My gaze found Richard, standing near the back, his expression attentive. Today, I'm announcing the launch of the Chen Westridge Innovation Academy, a professional development program designed to identify and nurture the next generation of financial leaders from backgrounds traditionally underrepresented in our industry. Applause rippled through the room. We'd been working on this initiative since before my appointment as CEO, but had kept the details confidential until now. The Academy will offer mentorship, advanced training, and direct experience in all aspects of our business. Participants will rotate through departments, contribute to strategic projects, and receive guidance from our most experienced leaders. I gestured to my right, where Richard and several other executives stood. The Academy will be led by Richard Parker, our new head of professional development and mentorship, working in collaboration with department heads across the firm. Richard stepped forward, accepting the role with a professional nod. As he moved toward the podium to say a few words, I caught his eye. For a brief moment, something passed between us, an acknowledgement of the distance we'd both traveled since that day 5 years ago. "Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell," he began formally. When I was first approached about leading this initiative, I'll admit I was hesitant. My background hasn't exactly been in professional development. A knowing chuckle rippled through the room. Richard's reputation from the old Westridge days wasn't entirely forgotten. But in my 5 years leading our Midwest region, I've come to recognize something fundamental. The greatest risk in our business isn't market volatility or economic uncertainty, it's homogeneity of thought. When everyone in the room shares the same background, the same education, the same perspectives, we develop blind spots, dangerous ones. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before briefly settling on me. 5 years ago, I was part of a culture that failed to recognize the value of different perspectives. That culture nearly destroyed this company. Today, I'm committed to building one that actively seeks out and develops diverse talent, not because it's politically correct, but because it's strategically essential. It wasn't a personal apology. Richard would likely never acknowledge in public how he had treated me specifically. But it was a public recognition of the flawed thinking that had informed his behavior, and a commitment to changing it in others. After the announcement, as the room cleared, Richard approached me. "Compelling announcement," I said. You sounded like you actually believe in the mission. I do, he replied, surprising me with his directness. Not for the reasons you might, perhaps, but I believe in results, and the results of our transformation are undeniable. I nodded. Accepting this, Richard would always be Richard, driven by metrics and outcomes rather than empathy or social justice. But if that drive now led him to champion diverse perspectives rather than mock them, the end result was what mattered. Just so we're clear, I said, the Academy isn't window dressing. It's not a PR move or a token initiative. I expect real development, real advancement for participants. Understood, he replied. I didn't accept this role to fail at it. As he turned to leave, he hesitated, then turned back. Your hair, by the way. I tensed slightly, muscle memory from years of uninvited comments. It suits you, he finished simply. Always did. I was too narrow-minded to see it. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't even a proper apology. But coming from Richard Parker, it was acknowledgement of a kind I never expected to hear. Thank you, Richard, I replied. Make the Academy a success, and we'll consider that particular debt settled. As I watched him walk away, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From the humiliated analyst whose expertise was dismissed, to the CEO reshaping an industry. From dreads that were mocked as wild, to a symbol of authenticity that I never again dimmed or hid to make others comfortable. Later that evening, as I gathered my things to leave, I paused at the window of my office, formerly Richard's corner suite, with its sweeping views of the city. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the financial district. Below, people streamed out of buildings, heading home after another day of pushing papers and moving money. My phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. Saw the announcement online. Academy is getting positive press already. You've come a long way from the analyst who walked into my networking event looking for an escape route. I smiled, typing back, We both have. Dinner next week to celebrate? Her response came immediately. Absolutely, my treat. Proud of you, Queen V. I slipped my phone into my bag and took one last look at the view. 5 years ago, Richard Parker had reached for my hair in a boardroom full of people who either laughed or looked away. Today, I had given him a chance at redemption. Not because he deserved it, but because transformation, real, lasting transformation, requires converting critics into allies. The company I now led bore little resemblance to the one that had once dismissed me. Our executive team reflected the diversity of the world we operated in. Our performance consistently outpaced more homogeneous competitors. And our culture recognized that brilliance comes in many forms, sometimes in the mind of a woman with wild dreads who sees patterns others miss. I turned off the office light and headed for the elevator. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles for recognition and respect. The work of transformation is never truly complete. But tonight, I walked out the front door of the building as its CEO, my hair still as beautifully wild as the day Richard had mocked it, my vision for the future clearer than ever. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby, now empty except for security. As I crossed toward the exit, I caught my reflection in the polished marble wall. Confident stance, tailored suit, dreads cascading past my shoulders. I looked like exactly what I was, a woman who had transformed humiliation into empire. One analysis, one decision, one day at a time. Outside, the warm evening air carried the sounds of the city, honking taxis, distant conversations, the persistent rhythm of urban life continuing around me. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of completion. Not an ending, exactly, but the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. 5 years ago, I'd walked out of this building carrying a box of personal items and a determination to prove my worth, somewhere I'd be valued. Today, I walked out carrying the responsibility of leading the very institution that had once dismissed me, transformed by my vision into something stronger, more inclusive, and ultimately more successful. The most powerful revenge wasn't destruction. It was reconstruction, building something better from the ruins of what had failed you. I hailed a taxi, ready to head home. Tomorrow would be another day of leading, challenging, and transforming. But tonight, I would celebrate how far I'd come, from the woman whose hair was mocked in a boardroom to the CEO whose vision was reshaping an industry. Some journeys you can't possibly imagine when you begin them. But that doesn't make the destination any less sweet when you arrive.